On a quiet autumn morning in Willow Creek Park, a veteran walked silently with his dog along a path covered in golden leaves when he suddenly noticed a little disabled girl sitting alone on a bench. On her small arm was a dark circular tattoo with a serpent inside, the exact same mark engraved on his own skin. In that instant, time seemed to stop. The past he thought was buried came rushing back, and a forgotten story began to awaken. Stay with us to uncover the mysterious connection between a soldier's scar and a child's secret. And don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next journey. Wishing you a peaceful and hopeful day. The morning in Willow Creek carried that quiet calm only autumn could bring. A soft wind drifted through the maple trees, sending spirals of golden leaves dancing across the narrow paths that curved around the lake. The sun was still low, its pale light stretching across the rippling water, where a few ducks glided lazily through the mist. Jack Carter walked alone with his German shepherd, Rex, following the rhythm of his steady, heavy steps. Jack was 42, tall, broad-shouldered, his face marked by years that had seen more than most. His gray-green eyes, sharp yet weary, seemed to hold echoes of old battles. He didn't walk to enjoy the view, he walked because silence and routine were all that kept the noise in his head at bay. Rex trotted beside him, a 6-year-old German shepherd, strong and loyal, his coat a mix of black and tan, his movements precise and alert. He was the only companion Jack truly trusted. The two had been together since Jack's last deployment, and though the uniform was long gone, Rex still carried the discipline of a soldier. Jack often joked to himself that Rex had adjusted to civilian life better than he had. The path ahead was empty, save for a few joggers in the distance, and the world felt still until Rex suddenly stopped. His ears shot up, his muscles tensed, and a low growl rumbled in his chest. Jack's instinct sharpened in an instant. He tightened his grip on the leash, scanning the area, his gaze sweeping the quiet park. "Easy, boy," he muttered, his voice low and calm but edged with alertness. Rex didn't relax. His growl deepened, and his eyes fixed on a single direction, a wooden bench near the lake's edge, half-shadowed beneath an old oak tree. There, barely visible through the veil of drifting leaves, sat a small figure. Jack frowned, his body unconsciously shifting into a defensive stance as he approached. As he drew closer, the shape became clearer. A little girl, no older than 5 or 6, sitting alone on the bench. Her blonde hair was tangled, falling in messy strands across her face. The sleeves of her worn beige dress were slightly rolled up, revealing thin arms and bruised knees. One of her legs was made of metal, a prosthetic, dull silver in the morning light. In her lap rested a pair of small crutches, scratched and muddy. She looked fragile, her body folded inward, as if trying to disappear into herself. When she heard the footsteps, she tensed, clutching the crutches tighter, her big blue eyes filled with fear. Jack stopped a few feet away, raising one hand slightly. "Hey there," he said softly, lowering his voice so it wouldn't frighten her. "It's okay. You're safe. He won't hurt you." Rex quieted, though his ears stayed forward, still cautious. The child didn't respond, only watched the stranger with a mix of distrust and exhaustion. Jack took a slow step closer, keeping his tone gentle. "What are you doing out here all by yourself?" Still, she said nothing, only glanced down, her shoulders trembling under the weight of the morning chill. Then Jack noticed something. As the sunlight shifted through the branches, it caught on her arm, a strange mark etched into the skin just above her wrist. He froze. His breath caught before he even realized why. It wasn't a bruise, it wasn't dirt, it was a tattoo. A dark, circular shape, thick and defined, with a serpent coiled inside. For a moment, he thought his eyes were deceiving him. The design was too familiar, too impossible to ignore. He took a cautious step forward, his heart thudding. That symbol, he had seen it before. Not in decades, not since the day everything went up in smoke. The serpent in the circle, the mark of Echo Unit. Jack felt the world tilt slightly as if the ground beneath him had shifted. He hadn't heard that name in years. Echo Unit had been erased from every file, every record, every living memory. A ghost of the military's darkest experiments. After their final mission, everything had been burned, buried, and silenced. Only the few who had survived carried the truth, and one shared sign to remember it by: That same serpent, inked in blood and secrecy. Jack's pulse quickened. Without thinking, he rolled up the sleeve of his right arm. There, faded but still clear, was the same tattoo, a black circle with the serpent curled tightly within it. Time had softened the lines, but the symbol was unmistakable. He stared at it, then at the girl's identical mark, and for a long moment, everything around him fell away. The sound of the leaves, the quiet of the park, even Rex's steady breathing, all of it vanished. Only the sight of that small arm remained, and the impossible truth it carried. He knelt slowly, his knees brushing the fallen leaves. The girl flinched, but didn't move away. "What's your name?" he asked gently. After a brief silence, a small voice answered, barely above a whisper. "Emily." Her lips trembled, but her gaze didn't leave his. Jack swallowed hard. The name hit him like an echo, faint, distant, but familiar. He didn't understand yet, but somewhere deep down, he felt the weight of something long forgotten stir. "Emily," he repeated quietly. "That's a pretty name." She gave no reaction, only looked at the tattoo on his arm when he lowered his sleeve again, her expression softening, almost curious. Jack exhaled slowly, fighting the flood of questions building in his chest. Who was she? Why did she carry the same mark? And why did her name feel like it belonged to another time? But one thing was clear. The girl was alone, scared, and far too young to bear something connected to Echo. "It's all right," he said finally, voice steady. "You can come with me. I'll make sure you're safe." He held out his hand. She hesitated, glancing from his face to Rex, then back again. After a few long seconds, she reached out with her small fingers and took his hand. Jack lifted her gently, feeling how light she was, almost weightless. He slipped his jacket over her shoulders, its size swallowing her small frame. Rex walked close by as they began to leave the park, his head lowered, tail swaying slowly. The breeze carried the faint scent of rain, and the golden leaves continued to fall around them, whispering against the ground like fading memories. As Jack glanced down, he caught the glint of sunlight reflecting off the matching tattoos, one old and faded, one new and dark. For a brief second, the two marks aligned perfectly, like pieces of a forgotten puzzle. He didn't know what it meant yet, only that destiny had just found him again, in the form of a frightened child with a serpent on her arm. And as they walked together toward the quiet street beyond the park, the weight of the past pressed against him like a shadow that refused to die. The story he thought had ended years ago had just begun to breathe again. The late afternoon light spilled softly across the wooden floor of the small cabin, tinting everything in warm shades of amber. Dust floated lazily in the air, catching the glow that filtered through the thin curtains. The stillness was deep, broken only by the faint ticking of a wall clock and the occasional crackle from the stove. Jack sat at the small table near the window, his elbows resting on the worn wood as he watched Emily eat in silence. She was small, almost fragile against the large chair, her blonde hair falling into her eyes as she bit quietly into a piece of bread. Her movements were careful, timid, as if she wasn't sure she was allowed to be there. Rex lay on the floor beside her, his head resting on his paws, eyes half open but alert. Every few seconds his ears twitched, tracking faint sounds beyond the walls, a habit born from years of training. Jack noticed it, but didn't speak. The air inside the cabin was calm, but it carried an undercurrent of tension that none of them fully understood. He glanced at Emily again. She looked exhausted, but not just from hunger or cold. There was something deeper in her expression, the weariness of someone too young to carry whatever life had already placed on her shoulders. Jack stood, pushing his chair back with a soft scrape, and walked to a shelf where an old metal tin box sat hidden behind a stack of books. It was covered in a thin layer of dust, untouched for years. He hesitated for a moment, his hand hovering above it, then took a quiet breath and pulled it out. The sound of metal against wood echoed faintly in the small room. He set the box on the table and sat down again. Emily looked up curiously, crumbs still clinging to her fingers. Jack's voice was low, almost a murmur, as he spoke more to himself than to her. "Didn't think I'd ever open this again." The latch creaked when he lifted it, releasing a faint metallic click that seemed louder than it should have. Inside lay a few relics of another life, a pair of dog tags, a folded patch, and a single photograph worn from time and smoke. Jack picked it up carefully, his fingers tracing the curled edges. The image showed 4 soldiers standing shoulder to shoulder in the mud, rain streaking across their faces, their expressions hardened by something more than battle. They were young, strong, defiant, and proud, and on each of their forearms, visible even through the grime, was the same circular serpent tattoo. Echo Unit. Jack's eyes lingered on one figure in particular, a woman standing second from the right. Her hair was tied back dark and messy, her smile faint but steady. She had eyes like the sea before a storm, sharp, unyielding, yet filled with something warm beneath. Lena Hayes. The name formed silently in his mind, followed by a pang that shot through his chest. Lena had been part of his unit, one of the few who could match his stubbornness, one of the best in the field. He'd thought she died on the last mission, lost when the chopper went down. But now, staring at the photo and the little girl across the table, Jack felt a chill crawl through him. The resemblance was undeniable. Emily had her eyes. He sat back, the photograph trembling slightly in his hands. Memories flooded in, the smoke, the jungle, the deafening roar of gunfire, the screams swallowed by rain. He could almost smell the burning fuel and hear Lena's voice shouting through the static, "Go, Jack! Don't look back!" But he had looked back. He'd seen the explosion swallow the clearing, seen the names of his team fade from every report afterward. Echo Unit had been erased, just as the world had been told it never existed. Yet here was a living piece of it, sitting quietly in his kitchen, eating bread like a lost child who had stumbled out of a nightmare. Jack placed the photo down and rubbed his face, trying to steady his breath. He needed answers, but the girl was too young to give them. When he looked at Emily again, she had stopped eating and was watching him silently, as if sensing the storm inside him. "You've got someone looking for you, haven't you?" he asked gently. She nodded faintly. "My mom." Her voice was soft, fragile as a whisper. "She told me to wait. She said someone would find me." Jack's heart tightened. "Did she tell you who?" Emily shook her head. "Just that. I'd know when I saw them." Later, while tidying the small pile of clothes he had given her to change into, Jack noticed something tucked into the pocket of her worn dress, a small crumpled piece of paper folded tightly. He hesitated, then unfolded it. The handwriting was hurried, the ink smudged by water and time, but the message was still clear enough to read. "If you meet someone with this mark, trust them." Beneath the words was a faint sketch, the same serpent within a circle. Jack stared at it for a long moment, his hand trembling slightly. The handwriting, it was hers. He would have known it anywhere. Lena Hayes had written this. The realization hit him like a weight dropped from the sky. Lena had survived. Somehow, somewhere, she was alive long enough to write this and send her daughter out into the world with that message. It meant she'd known he was still alive too, that she believed he would find the girl. Jack's throat tightened. He set the note beside the photograph, the 2 pieces of his past aligning perfectly on the table, and leaned back in his chair, lost in thought. The fading sunlight touched his face, casting long shadows across the room, and he felt the ache of years press against his chest. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees. Rex lifted his head briefly, scanning the window before settling back down. Emily had fallen asleep on the couch, the piece of bread still resting near her hand. Jack watched her for a long while. In her small, tired face, he saw everything that time had stolen from him. Innocence, faith, the will to believe that good still existed. He realized she wasn't just a lost child. She was the thread that tied him back to everything he'd tried to forget. Jack stood, walked to the table, and picked up the paper again. The words seemed to pulse under the dim light. Trust them. He looked down at the serpent tattoo on his own arm, the ink faded but still alive. A quiet resolve settled in his eyes. "Lena," he murmured under his breath, "if you're out there, I'll find you. I owe you that much." The words hung in the air, heavy and certain. Rex stirred at the tone, letting out a faint grunt, as if understanding. Jack exhaled slowly, his gaze fixed on the window, where the sun's last glow slipped behind the trees. The cabin grew dim, and the silence thickened, broken only by the rhythm of their breathing. Jack reached for the old photograph one more time, tracing the outlines of the faces long gone. The dust on the surface caught the fading light like tiny sparks, remnants of a past that refused to die. He placed it gently back into the box, closed the lid, and sat in the quiet, feeling the echo of the promise he'd just made. Outside, the first stars began to appear, shimmering faintly above Willow Creek, as if bearing silent witness to the vow of a man who had just found a reason to keep fighting. The following afternoon arrived with a golden haze that settled gently over Willow Creek, the kind of quiet light that made even the smallest details seem fragile and still. Inside the cabin, Emily sat at the table drawing on a scrap of paper with a dull pencil Jack had found in a drawer. Her prosthetic leg rested beside the chair, its metallic frame gleaming faintly in the sun. Rex lay near the door, his head raised, occasionally sniffing at the air as if catching something beyond the calm of the house. Jack, meanwhile, stood by the window, adjusting his jacket and checking the road that led into town. He needed to resupply food, batteries, maybe a few gallons of gas, but as always, the thought of leaving her alone gnawed at him. Still, the town was only a few miles away, and he would be quick. He turned to Emily before stepping out. "You stay inside, all right? Lock the door, and don't open it for anyone but me." The girl nodded, her eyes solemn and understanding beyond her age. Jack gave Rex a silent signal, a small nod. The dog's ears perked up as if receiving a command. Rex would guard the house until his return. Jack hesitated one last moment before heading out, feeling that familiar unease creeping through his chest, the sense that the world around him was holding its breath. The town was quiet, as it often was in the early afternoon. A handful of locals moved about between the small grocery, the post office, and the feed store. Jack parked near the general store, keeping his head low beneath the bill of his cap. He didn't like standing out, not anymore. The woman behind the counter greeted him by name, and he managed a faint nod in return, picking up a few essentials without lingering. But as he loaded the bags into the back of his truck, his instincts began to stir. It was the kind of alertness that had saved his life too many times to ignore, that quiet shift in the air when something unseen starts watching back. On the drive home, he noticed it. A black pickup parked along the dirt road leading toward his cabin. The engine was off, the windows tinted. Jack slowed slightly, his pulse steady but rising. He glanced into the rearview mirror. No other vehicles in sight, just that truck, silent, unmoving, yet positioned perfectly to have a view of his property from across the valley. As he passed, he caught the faint glint of movement inside, a figure behind the wheel pretending to read a newspaper, but watching through the reflection of the mirror. Jack's grip on the steering wheel tightened, knuckles pale beneath the leather gloves. He didn't stop. He kept driving until the cabin came into view at the end of the road. The forest around it seemed unusually still. Birds had gone silent. Jack pulled into the gravel path, parked beside the porch, and got out without closing the door behind him. Rex immediately appeared in the doorway, his hackles raised, a deep rumble in his throat. Jack raised a hand to calm him, scanning the tree line. "Easy, boy. I see it too." The hairs on the back of his neck bristled. Something, or someone, had been here. As he circled the yard, Rex darted toward a patch of bushes near the fence, sniffing furiously before letting out a sharp bark. Jack crouched beside him and brushed the leaves aside. Half buried in the dirt was a small metallic object, no bigger than a coin. He picked it up carefully, wiping away the soil with his thumb. The moment he saw the engraving, a chill ran through him. A serpent curled inside a circle, the exact same mark that haunted his nightmares. The symbol of Echo Unit. He turned it in his hand, feeling its cold, precise edges. It wasn't random. Someone had left this here deliberately. A message, a warning. Or both. Inside the cabin, Jack placed the piece of metal on the table under the lamp, staring at it as if it might reveal something more if he just looked long enough. Emily watched quietly from the couch, hugging a small blanket to her chest. "Is something wrong?" she asked softly. Jack forced a small, calm smile. "No, sweetheart, just something from a long time ago." He didn't want to frighten her, not with the weight of what he now suspected. Someone knew he was alive, and that the girl was with him. He opened the metal tin again, retrieving the scorched folder he hadn't touched in years. The papers inside were brittle, edges blackened from fire, the text barely legible. Jack spread them across the table, running his finger over the faint lines of typed ink. There, near the bottom of one page, was a section that hadn't been completely destroyed. Scrawled in pen over faded print were a few surviving words: Project Echo, subject L. Hayes, status transferred. His chest tightened as he read it. Transferred, not deceased, not terminated. The implication was clear. Lena hadn't died. She had been moved, hidden. Jack sat back heavily, the chair creaking under his weight. The air in the cabin seemed to thicken. He closed the file slowly, pressing his hand over it as if to contain the tremor running through him. For years, he'd carried the guilt of believing she'd been lost because of him. And now, this, proof that she'd been taken somewhere, buried under the same secrets that had erased Echo from history. He looked toward the small figure of Emily, who was now fast asleep on the couch, her prosthetic leg leaning against the wall beside her. In her, he saw both a fragment of Lena and the proof that those who destroyed Echo had never truly stopped their work. He hid the folder beneath a loose floorboard near the table, covering it with an old rug. Rex followed his movements closely, his amber eyes fixed on every gesture. Jack knelt beside him, whispering low, "Stay close tonight, buddy. We're not alone out here." The dog responded with a soft grunt, settling himself near the front door, muscles coiled, beneath his fur like springs. Jack checked the locks, tested the windows, then extinguished the lamps one by one until only the faint glow from the hearth remained. Outside, dusk had settled into a deep orange hue. The black truck was gone now, but the unease lingered. Jack stood by the window, watching the last light fade beyond the trees, his reflection merging with the darkening glass. He rolled up his sleeve and looked at the tattoo on his arm, the serpent in the circle, faded but alive. "Someone's still hiding the truth," he whispered, voice low, resolute. "But they're not touching her. Not this time." His jaw tightened and his hand curled into a fist. Rex lifted his head from the floor, ears pricking at the distant rumble of an engine somewhere far down the road. Jack didn't move from the window. The night crept slowly over Willow Creek, wrapping the cabin in shadows. In the silence, only one thought remained clear in his mind. The past was hunting them again, and this time he would be ready. Morning broke over Willow Creek with a pale light filtered through the thin fog hanging low between the pines. The air was cool, heavy with dew, and the cabin stood quiet beneath a sky that looked both calm and foreboding. Jack had not slept much. He sat by the window before dawn, watching the shadows stretch and fade, his thoughts circling the same decision he had reached hours earlier. They couldn't stay here any longer. Whoever had found them once would return, and next time, they wouldn't just be watching. He packed a small duffel with supplies: water, food, a first aid kit, a flashlight, and the rusted fragment of the Echo insignia he had found in the dirt. The folder with Lena's name went inside his jacket, pressed close to his chest. Emily woke to the sound of zippers and soft clinking. She blinked sleepily from the couch, rubbing her eyes with small fists. "Are we leaving?" she asked, her voice thin, uncertain. Jack looked at her and nodded. "Just for a while," he said, trying to make it sound lighter than it felt. "Somewhere safer." She didn't ask where. There was a quiet understanding between them now, a fragile trust that didn't need explanations. Rex paced near the door, sensing the shift in atmosphere, his tail still but his eyes alert, waiting for the next command. Jack slung his bag over his shoulder, gave the dog a short nod, and together they stepped into the morning mist. The dirt road that wound away from the cabin was lined with wet grass and silence. Jack drove the old truck with both hands steady on the wheel, the engine growling softly beneath them. Emily sat beside him, wrapped in his jacket, watching the trees slide past outside. Her gaze was far away, unfocused, as if she were trying to remember something that had long since slipped through her fingers. Rex sat in the back seat, head raised, nose twitching as he stared out the window. For the first hour, there was nothing but the hum of the tires and the occasional call of a distant bird. But then, as they passed the last curve before the main road, Jack caught sight of something in the side mirror, a dark shape moving behind them. At first, it looked like a shadow, Then, as the truck turned onto the open stretch, he saw it more clearly, a black vehicle following at a measured distance. It didn't overtake, didn't fall back, just kept its pace, close enough to stay in view, far enough to remain unseen by anyone else. Jack's jaw tightened. He kept his eyes forward, but the old instinct in his chest began to burn again, that unshakable feeling of being hunted. "Hold on, kid," he muttered, pressing his foot down slightly. The engine rumbled louder, the tires spitting gravel. The black vehicle adjusted its speed to match. The chase didn't last long. They had just passed the clearing at the forest's edge when another truck appeared from the opposite direction, sliding to a stop across the narrow road, blocking their path. Jack slammed the brakes. The vehicle behind them closed in fast, tires screeching. Within seconds, they were boxed in. Emily gasped, clutching the seat, while Rex growled low in his throat, his fur bristling. Jack's hand went instinctively to the side holster strapped under his jacket. Old habit, though the weapon he carried now was just a revolver from a pawn shop. The doors of the other truck swung open. 3 men stepped out. They moved with the kind of confidence that came from training, not street brawls. Men used to violence, used to control. The one in front, tall and broad with close-cropped hair and a scar running along his jaw, wore a black jacket and a smirk that didn't reach his eyes. The other 2 flanked him, both younger, both with the same coiled energy of predators waiting for a signal. Jack noticed it immediately. The tattoos. Each of them bore a serpent inside a circle, inked boldly on their forearms. The same mark, the same symbol that had once defined his life and destroyed it. The leader took a few steps closer, boots crunching on the gravel. "Jack Carter," he said, his voice calm, almost amused. "Didn't think you'd still be breathing." Jack stayed silent, his stance steady. The man tilted his head, his grin widening. "You really think anyone still remembers Echo? That story's gone, wiped clean. You're chasing ghosts." He gestured toward the girl in the truck. "And now you've dragged a kid into it. You always had a soft spot for lost causes." Jack's answer came in motion, not words. He swung the door open fast, hitting the man's knee with a crack that sent him stumbling backward. In the same heartbeat, Rex leapt from the back seat, a blur of fur and muscle. The 2 younger men shouted, reaching for their weapons, but Rex was faster, teeth flashing as he tackled one of them to the ground. The forest erupted in chaos. The sounds of struggle, gravel scraping under boots, the sharp echo of fists meeting bone. Jack caught the second man with a clean blow to the throat, sending him staggering. The leader recovered quickly, drawing a knife with a wicked glint, lunging forward. Jack parried the strike with his arm, pain lancing through his shoulder, but he countered with a punch that sent the blade spinning into the dirt. Rex snarled, pinning his opponent until the man stopped moving. Jack turned, breathing hard, his shirt streaked with dust and blood. Only one of them remained, the leader, eyes burning with fury now, not arrogance. He spat into the dirt and backed away slowly, realizing he was outmatched. "You can't hide forever, Carter," he hissed. "They're still watching, always have been." Then he turned and ran toward the forest, vanishing into the trees before Jack could raise his weapon. Silence fell, broken only by Rex's heavy panting and Emily's frightened sobs from inside the truck. Jack straightened, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. He looked down at the bodies on the ground, 2 unconscious, 1 gone. His eyes caught something glinting near the front tire of the truck, a metal tag half buried in the gravel. He bent to pick it up, brushing the dirt away, and froze when he read the engraving. L. Hayes, subject code 02. The letters were faint, corroded by time, but unmistakable. It was Lena's tag, or what was left of it. His stomach twisted as he stared at it, realization hitting like a punch to the chest. She hadn't been just a soldier. She'd been turned into something else, part of whatever Project Echo had become after they were erased. He closed his hand around the tag, the edges biting into his skin. The fog had lifted, and the forest around them stood silent, almost watching. Jack turned back to Emily, who sat trembling in the passenger seat, eyes wide and wet. He forced a steadier tone. "It's over," he said softly, though he knew it wasn't. He tucked the tag into his pocket and climbed into the driver's seat. Rex jumped into the back, his body tense but unharmed, his eyes still fixed on the tree line. Jack started the engine, the rumble echoing through the clearing. The road ahead was empty again, but he no longer felt the illusion of safety. His gaze dropped briefly to the tag in his hand, and the faint, barely readable line scratched beneath the code. Sector 9, Old Station, the last known trace of Lena Hayes. He clenched his fist, his jaw set with grim determination. Whatever waited in that place, he would find it. For Lena, for Emily, for the truth buried beneath the ashes of Echo. The truck rolled forward, its tires grinding against the gravel, leaving behind the broken remnants of the ambush. The sun hung low through the trees, painting the road ahead in red-gold light. As the forest closed around them again, Jack's eyes hardened. He had spent years running from the ghosts of the past, but now at last he was hunting them. Dawn broke like a whisper over the valley, the first thin rays of sunlight spilling through the clouds as Jack's truck rumbled down the forgotten road toward Sector 9. The forest gave way to open land, where rusted train tracks wound through fields of fog and silence. A faint wind stirred the tall grass, carrying with it the scent of dust and iron, the smell of abandonment. Emily sat quietly in the passenger seat, her eyes wide as the derelict structure appeared ahead, an old railway station swallowed by weeds and time. Its windows were shattered, its roof sagging under years of decay. Rex stood at the back, ears pricked, his gaze fixed forward, sensing the tension that neither words nor silence could hide. The truck rolled to a stop before the gate, half collapsed and choked with vines. Jack stepped out first, scanning the horizon, his every instinct alert. The air here was heavy, unnaturally still, as though the earth itself was holding its breath. Emily followed, holding onto her crutches as she climbed down, her small figure dwarfed by the looming structure. Jack put a hand on her shoulder. "Stay close, no matter what happens," he said quietly. She nodded without hesitation, trusting him completely. Rex moved ahead, his paws stirring the dust on the cracked concrete, his nose twitching as he traced invisible trails left long ago. They entered through a broken side door that groaned on its hinges. Inside, the air was thick and cold, filled with the faint hum of distant electricity and the echo of dripping water. Dust coated everything, the counters, the metal shelves, the walls lined with peeling paint and faded warning signs. Sector 9, Restricted Area, one of them read in faded red letters. Jack's flashlight cut through the dark, its beam trembling slightly across the walls, revealing fragments of the past, abandoned clipboards, toppled cabinets, shattered glass. Emily held her breath, her eyes darting from shadow to shadow. Rex stayed low, his growl rumbling deep in his throat. They moved deeper into the station, past a corridor that led to what once might have been a records room. The smell of burnt paper and rust lingered there. Jack knelt beside a fallen filing cabinet and pried it open. Inside were stacks of folders, some intact, most charred or melted together by heat. He flipped through them one by one, scanning the remnants of names, serial numbers, fragments of old reports. One file caught his attention. Its corner bore a seal barely visible under the soot. Echo declassified. His pulse quickened. He wiped the dust away and opened it carefully. Inside were yellowed documents, faded photos, and typed reports stamped with red ink. He turned to the last page and froze. The final line, though faint, was still legible. Emily Hayes, genetic successor, survival prototype. For a moment the words didn't register. Then his stomach dropped, his throat tightening with disbelief. Emily looked up at him, confused by the sudden stillness. "Jack, what does it say?" He swallowed hard, his voice rough when he finally spoke. "It says, you were never supposed to exist." The words came out before he could stop them. He quickly caught himself and softened his tone. "It means they tried to make you strong, kiddo. Strong like your mom." Her brow furrowed in confusion, but she didn't ask further. Rex's low growl from the far end of the hallway broke the moment. Jack snapped the folder shut and rose to his feet. "Stay behind me." They followed Rex's lead into a deeper corridor, where the air grew colder and the light dimmer. The floor creaked beneath their steps. The hallway ended at a reinforced steel door marked Lab 03, Restricted. Jack found the lock already broken, as if someone had forced it open long ago. He pushed the door slowly, and it groaned before revealing the room beyond, a wide, windowless chamber filled with overturned tables, flickering lights, and shattered glass vials. Along the back wall were several containment units, Thick glass pods, most empty, one still sealed, condensation clouding the interior. He approached cautiously, his heart pounding. Through the fogged glass, a faint silhouette moved, small, frail, but alive. He wiped the surface with his sleeve, and the breath caught in his throat. Lena Hayes. She was barely recognizable, her hair matted, her face pale and hollow. But the eyes, those eyes were the same. The same as in the photo, the same as Emily's. Jack's voice trembled when he spoke her name. Lena. Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused at first, then widened in recognition. Her lips moved soundlessly before a single tear traced down her cheek. Jack slammed his shoulder against the locking mechanism until it gave way. The door hissed open, and he caught her as she stumbled forward into his arms. The silence shattered with the sudden blare of alarms. Red lights flared to life overhead, painting the corridor in flashes of warning. "Unauthorized breach detected," a robotic voice echoed through the speakers. Jack tightened his grip around Lena, helping her stand. "We're getting out," he said firmly. Rex barked, spinning toward the exit. Emily clung to her crutches, trying to keep up as they moved through the chaos. Smoke drifted from the vents, and the sound of mechanical locks disengaging echoed behind them. Jack half-carried Lena down the hallway, his breath ragged. The old station trembled as though the building itself wanted to bury its secrets for good. They burst through the final corridor, just as a burst of daylight broke through the cracked ceiling. The air outside was cold and sharp after the heavy staleness inside. Jack guided Lena toward the entrance while Rex scouted ahead, barking sharply to clear the path. Emily limped quickly behind, her crutches clattering against the ground. They emerged from the doorway as the sun crested over the horizon, flooding the ruined station with a golden glow. The alarms still wailed faintly inside, but out here, in the open air, it felt like the sound was already fading into memory. Lena's steps faltered as they reached the clearing. She turned to Jack, her voice trembling with exhaustion. "I knew. That mark would bring you here," she whispered, her fingers weakly clutching his sleeve. Jack met her gaze, his throat tight, unable to find words for everything he wanted to say. The guilt, the years, the promise he'd kept without even knowing. He reached out and took her hand gently. "It wasn't just a mark," he said quietly. "It was a promise that we never leave each other behind." Lena's eyes glistened, her lips trembling with a faint, grateful smile. Emily stood beside them, clutching Rex's fur for balance, looking up at her mother for the first time, with tears shining in her eyes. The morning light stretched across the clearing, catching on the tattoos that bound them. 3 identical serpents coiled in a circle, glinting faintly against the dawn. The wind carried the sound of the alarms away into the distance, leaving only silence, broken by the steady rhythm of breathing. 3 survivors standing beneath the rising sun. For the first time in years, Jack felt the weight of the past begin to lift. The story of Echo wasn't erased after all. It had simply waited, buried in shadow, for this moment of light. In the end, this story is not just about a veteran, a little girl, or a mother found in the shadows of the past. It is about the quiet power of compassion, the kind that moves without reward, that protects without question, that carries others through the darkest nights. True courage is not always loud. Sometimes it is the silent choice to care when no one else will. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to share it with someone who still believes in kindness. Leave a comment, tell us what you felt, and join this small circle of souls who still believe light can rise from broken places. Don't forget to subscribe, so together we can keep telling stories that remind us what it means to be human. May God bless you and keep your heart warm today.